Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here for the closing out of Rokkr's Vanguard season press availability. Today, we're joined by Minnesota Rokkr coaches Saintt and Loony and version 1 leadership, Jake Trobaugh and Brett Diamond. The way this will work today is we're joined by fans as well. We are live on our YouTube. We're live on Twitter Spaces. So we'll start off by going around the horn here and getting reporters' questions. Reporters who are on the line, just drop your name in chat for me and I will go in the order those names appear, and you can go off mute and ask your question. So I'll tell you when you're up. And then once we get through reporter questions, we'll go through as many as you guys have. We'll turn the table to some fans who are in the YouTube chat. So drop your questions in YouTube chat, fans, for the coaches and leadership, and we'll get to those towards the end of the half hour. To start things off, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to COO Brett Diamond. Brett, go ahead.
Thanks, Cassie, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. Clearly a disappointing end to the season for Minnesota Rokkr. It's important for all our fans and the Rokkr community to know that as an organization, really from top to bottom, and this includes the players and the coaches, the results were unacceptable. And, we'll talk about that over the course of this session. But our expectations as an organization are high, right? The expectation is that we are contending to win championships and that we are in contention to win champs, not scratching and clawing to qualify or miss it entirely. There's no question in my mind that the dedication and work ethic of the coaches and players this year, was high, and that's one of the challenges when you fall short of expectations, and these guys will talk about it. I can't say enough good things about the players as human beings, and really want to thank them for all of the effort that they've put into this organization. And really, I think when we look back, this will be kind of one era of Minnesota Rokkr these past 2 years, from the time that we signed that initial roster heading into the Cold War season. Incredible highs last year in 2021 with the Major 5 win and finishing top 4 at champs. And as an organization, we were all aligned in bringing that roster back and having that continuity going into this season. At the end of the day, we fell short of expectations. And that's something that, we'll be thinking a lot about as we go forward. So, we'll highly defer to the coaches and to Jake to talk about specifics, with the look back. We'll share what we can about the look forward. Obviously, we've got free agency and roster mania in front of us. A couple mechanics just for fans to be aware of, and for media as well, especially media that don't follow Call of Duty day to day. So Jake will talk in a second about which of our players are free agents heading into the next season. But from a cadence standpoint, a week after Call of Duty Champs ends, which the last day is Sunday the 4th. So a week after that is when teams that have option years on their player contracts have to exercise the option to extend those contracts. And then a week after that is when free agency truly opens. So that's what we're looking at over the course of the next couple of weeks. So I'll turn it over to Jake Trobaugh, who leads our contract negotiations and works very closely with obviously the Rokkr coaches, but all of our coaches on Rokkr construction.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. For the calls awareness in the larger group, we did exercise our team option to extend Attach, Priesta, Major Maniac, and Standy going into this year. So those contracts will be expiring 2 weeks after champs, like Brett mentioned. The players who we currently have under contract with the team option to renew are Cult Havoc and Fame. Cassie, in terms of cadence, happy to sort of to talk about the season as a whole, can pass it to the coaches or can begin taking media requests open to whatever path makes sense.
Sure. Jacob from Deserto, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Hello, yeah. So obviously, like we mentioned, last season ended really well, and I think obviously expectations were quite high this year. What went wrong, and how is this year going to sort of better help you figure out your roster plans for next season?
Yeah, I'll take that question. I think going into the season with our roster from last year, we had a lot of high expectations with how we finished out the season. However, the team's play style and role structure just didn't really work out too well in a game like Vanguard. I think in Cold War we were able to play the game a lot slower and more methodically and win a lot of our games that way. But when it came to Vanguard, there was a lot of split second decision making, and you just need to make a lot of plays, on impulse. You didn't really have as much time to kind of think out your plays in this game. And we just started really slow with that roster. I mean, we went into the first stage and we felt like we were super, super close to figuring it out. But we lost that game 5 round 11 against Seattle to starters and losers at the first event. And it felt like we were kind of just on the back foot ever since then, where going into stage 2, we just were always down 0-2 in every single series, and we just couldn't figure out how to win those game ones. And then at that point, we just dug ourselves a really big hole, and we made that roster change that we made. We performed exceptionally online throughout the season. We were, I think, number 4 in total points through the online qualifying matches, but we just couldn't really close out the winners round 1 series that we needed at Major 3 and Major 4. If we won both those winners round 1s, would have got us in champs at the very least. And I think winning those winner round 1 matchups just help you go so much further in a tournament, help you build a lot of confidence momentum.
Yeah, I think the biggest disconnect between last year and this year is major performance, right? You saw us sort of squeezing winners bracket barely last year a couple times. And we were able to turn it around and make the most of that at the majors. We had 2 top 4 finishes. We won an event. It seemed like we were we were taking advantage of all the opportunities we gave ourselves. This year it was sort of the opposite. We were getting winners bracket slots. We weren't doing much with them. We were losing our winners round 1 and then going and playing essentially one and dones through the lower half of the bracket. And I think that was the main disconnect and sort of the determining factor between us making playoffs and not.
Okay. Jack, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, go ahead. You're up.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. There are already a few rumors circulating about the future of players, specifically Attach. Can you shed any light on whether he will re-sign with the organisation next year, whether any negotiations have already started? Or if not, can you shed any light on how valuable retaining a player like Dylan is for the brand and the team?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. I think given that playoffs hasn't started yet, right, and most contracts, to Brett's point, expire 2 weeks after playoffs end, it's not our intention on this call to talk roster specifics or player specifics. Dylan was an incredible player for us this year. He was an incredible player for us last year and is super valuable. I think every org wants to retain someone of Dylan's stature, both in and out of game, right? He's the quintessential pro. So like with that, aside from that, really not much we'll be talking about with regard to sort of free agency or the future of Minnesota Rokkr players.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Joey, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So you guys kind of already touched on it in regards to how Vanguard kind of played with the roster that you guys kind of set out with. Is there, looking to the next season with Modern Warfare 2, is there any talk about how that game could play and how that might shape your roster? Because it's kind of, some players have already played it and they kind of said it played a lot like Modern Warfare 2019. Is there any kind of talk about how you might build the roster in regards to that game specifically?
I'll take that one. I think it's kind of tough because it's such early stages. I know, like you said, a couple players had played it. I haven't really heard that much other than I think like the slide being maybe a little bit different and not as abusive, I guess, as a mechanic. But I just think you really take the same approach when going into a game on how you build a roster. I think the first two key elements of a team are just like a main AR and an entry sub. I think any pro, any coach, anyone that builds a roster will tell you that those are like the two main focal points. And then in this day and age, I think you look at like picking up two flexes, one that could be more like on the AR heavy side and then one on the SMG heavy side. And you just kind of take that approach going into a new game, regardless of like the rumors and what you've heard of how it'd play out.
Yeah, because once the game's fully released, I feel like they're always just so different from how they play out in the beta. You always kind of have like an idea in your head on how the game's going to play out after playing it in the beta phase. And then after practicing it for 4 weeks or so, it's just like my expectations were nowhere near what I thought they were going to be.
All right, guys. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of questions. First one's for Brett. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion from players and fans about how they sort of want the league to go, or certain like features or new additions or whatever. How do you feel about the direction of the league, like as an executive of the franchise? And are there any key changes or additions you might want to see going forward?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. First of all, I'll say that we're a pretty vocal group behind the scenes with Activision Blizzard and the Call of Duty League staff. And, we're certainly not shy about sharing our points of view on things. Generally speaking, we like to respect the internal processes of the league. And so I'd say we're one of the more vocal teams internally, but one of the quieter teams externally. To try to give you, try to give you a little more specific. Look, we have enormous confidence in Call of Duty as a game franchise and the original premise of the ability to build around a local and a national fan base around a title that's as popular as Call of Duty, is still something we are really excited about heading into next season. And we saw some of that with the incredible passion of our fans at certainly at Major 2, where, and that's frankly, one of the coolest experiences of my career was like feeling that passion of the fans and in the venue, and the fans that are coming out to our watch parties. So we're super excited to continue to engage with our fans, and we've got a lot of cool ideas we're cooking up for next year. I don't know much more about Modern Warfare 2 than hear from than I read in the tabloids or hear from some of the limited number of guys that have play tested it, but everything seems to be really positive, and there seems to be a lot of excitement around MW2, which should pay off for the league as a whole. When you think about, obviously, it's really painful to not have finished better in New York and be moving on to champs, but when you look at structurally for the league, what came together at that New York major in terms of like a lot of it is exactly what you want to see when you're kind of designing a league and a schedule and a format where you had top seeds still up for grabs. You had this group of, whatever it was, 5-6 teams all battling for your last 2 or 3 playoff spots. That's incredibly compelling. And, we saw increased viewership with that last major. And, even though we won't be at champs, hopefully thinking about, on behalf of the league, hopefully we see, that carryover. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that there's some things that we think the league can improve. And we're pretty vocal about that behind the scenes. We're also thinking a lot about how we can do more with things that are within our control. We don't know exactly what the format will be for next year, and it hasn't been announced yet. But if there are online qualifiers next year, we're going to look at trying to bring teams to Minnesota to play those qualifiers in person. Maybe not every match, obviously, but with some regular cadence. So those are things that we're spending a lot of time on the business side of the organization evaluating for next year.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure who would be the relevant person to answer this question, but obviously Minnesota is one of the only franchises with a Challengers team this year. I think the other two are Toronto have a couple and Boston now have one. Do you plan to build a Challengers team going forward, and do you believe that other franchises should follow suit?
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on that. I think there are multiple reasons why organizations are incentivized to field challengers teams. Ours is sort of twofold, with the primary focus being competitive based, right? Like, we want to create a talent pipeline for future Minnesota Rokkr players. Our coaches are very in touch with what's going on in the amateur space. They're constantly keeping an eye on challenger streams and keeping their ears to the street in terms of who the next big talent is to come out of that scene. We will continue to do that. That has been the case. That will be the case. But in terms of challenger rosters, sort of evaluating that on an as need basis, or when we see really good talent. So the conversation is, we're always having the conversation, but we're not in a place to give a firm yes or no.
I give that.
Okay, Jack, you're up.
Thank you. You mentioned a little bit before about results this season, and specifically the disconnect between online and LAN results, singling out Major 3 and Major 4. Last season, we saw the leadership of Major Maniac pull you through the Rokkr Resurrection and other tournaments. Was there any slight regret about allowing him to leave, knowing his LAN mentality?
Yeah, I can take that one. Mike was definitely a huge benefactor to our team in terms of shot calling and S&D. I think he added such a big layer of consistency for us in that game mode, starting in the second half of Cold War, when we kind of told him to take over that leadership role in that game mode for us. But when it comes to Respawn, we never really had a true leader on the team with any iterations of the roster. It was kind of always a team dynamic in that game mode, and I think our Respawn definitely turned it around at the second half of the year. But losing Mike was definitely a big hurt in S&D in terms of getting us more default level consistency in that game mode. We had a lot of good rush strats toward the second half of the year, but I think Mike did a really good job at reading the mid rounds and having a lot of good defaults.
Thank you.
Joey, go ahead.
All right, hey guys, just one or two more. Anyone can really field them. First one, you guys already kind of touched on it already, but the champs format for this year obviously is just top 8. And kind of the general consensus before the New York major was that all 12 teams should be there. But then as the major kind of went on, and all the storylines started to develop and the points started to get really close, I think the feeling kind of shifted. With you guys not being there, how do you feel about the format now that everything's kind of played out?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go first, just from sort of my point of view, and being in some of the meetings and decision making at the league level. And honestly, like, Brian, Dan, Jake, you can give your own opinion. If it differs from mine, that's totally fine. When votes were taken at the beginning of the year, we voted for 8 teams at champs. We voted for 12 teams to be in the majors. Generally speaking, if all the qualifiers were on LAN, we likely would have supported 8 teams at the majors. Personally, and I think organizationally, we view you want the regular season matches to have stakes. And even some of the other titles we're in have enormous stakes for their regular season and qualifying format. So, whether you're comparing it to traditional sports or other esports titles, I personally think that's really important. We ultimately voted for 12 teams at the majors because the qualifiers being online. As it relates to champs, obviously it sucks that we're not there. And if I could wave a magic wand and put us there, that'd be nice. But I hold true to what my view was at the beginning of the season, which is, you need to have stakes to your regular season. And if you can't finish top 8 in the regular season, you don't deserve to go to champs. And that's pretty much how I see it personally. But you guys can add your perspective and feel free to disagree.
No, I totally agree with Brett 100%. Since year one, I was always on the train of 8 teams being at champs. Granted, the MW season was a little bit different with COVID coming in and taking out a lot of the tournaments we had scheduled on LAN for that season. So it definitely switched up the dynamic of the year quite a bit. But I think 8 teams makes a lot of sense. The only change I would like to see is having a lot more matches be played going in the playoffs, because I think our season record to end the year was 14-14. I think with a game like Call of Duty, with how fast paced it is and how short the series can be, I think you need a lot more series played throughout the year, especially with how competitive the league has been this season. I would ideally like to play, it's probably a bit unrealistic, but I think around like 60 series a year would yield a much more consistent range of results throughout the course of the season.
All right, thanks for that. Just one more. You guys mentioned that you signed Fame for next season. What is the plan for him going forward? You guys have the academy team. Is he just is he meant to maybe compete for a starting spot, or just kind of kept as a sub for now, and then maybe you look at him again kind of midway through next season?
Yeah, I think so. We'll take a step back and talk through sort of the reasoning for signing Fame initially, and then can again touch on future plans. So Brian, Dan, do one of you want to touch on sort of the reason and why we thought it would be a good idea to bring him in toward the tail end?
Yeah. Obviously going into Major 4, we're one of the bubble teams. I think we went into the 9th seed, tied with the 9th seed with Florida. Obviously, because we sent Mike to Florida, we didn't actually have a sub player. The sub player was myself. So just going into Major 4, you never know what's really going to happen, whether a player gets COVID or just if something happens where they're unable to play. I didn't want to come in to play for any of my players if it had to be with our season in the line. And Fame had performed exceptionally well, I'm pretty sure, at the Toronto Challengers and the Boston Challengers, which was a kind of easy pickup. And he did start the year, I'm pretty sure, as an AR and then transition into a sub. So that means he was comfortable in both roles. So if anything happened to Attach or Pista, he can fill in as an AR. If anything happened to Standy or Havoc, he was able to fill in as a sub. So that was the main reasoning of picking him up before Major 4, just because we wanted to be prepared for anything going into that major.
Yeah, I again, we addressed this at the top. We don't plan to discuss too much of off-season or next year's Minnesota Rokkr roster, but to Dan and Brian's point, when you asked about roster construction, it is important to have people who are available going into a new title that can play multiple roles, because you never know what the meta is going to be like when the game launches, right? So giving ourselves the option to extend a player like Fame, who is incredibly versatile, was also at the forefront of our mind when deciding what player to pick up for the tail end of this year. If something was to go horribly wrong, and for whatever reason we needed someone to step in and play at an event.
All right, guys, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Cool. We're gonna switch gears to some fan questions. The first one I've got here is from Miner 21. Broadly speaking, how does the org intend to attract top-level free agents, especially with some of this, outside perception that Minnesota might not be the most desirable place to live and play?
Yeah, I think something that we sort of pride ourselves on at the top is trying to create a home for players that is one that they want to be at and feel like they were treated well at, whether that's while they're currently a player or 2 years down the line when they're streaming at 1 a.m. and are reminiscing on some of their fond memories of going to events. We always sort of want to be that home where people say, okay, they treated us right. It's our go-to goal across all of our teams with all of our players. I think that has helped us attract talent in other off seasons, whether that be the 20 heading toward the tail end of the 2019 season going into last year when we were able to sign Attach, Accuracy, Priest, and Major Maniac, right? And we've also sort of been able to leverage how generous we are with our players and other titles. So really sticking true to those goals we set for ourselves and making sure that we're a place that people want to play at because they know they'll be treated well.
Thanks, Jake. This was somewhat addressed, but this is a question from BB. How much do you think about the Modern Warfare 2019 season when it comes to roster mania coming up, since the play is almost identical, allegedly, to 2019's game?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we kind of addressed it. I mean, the thing about MW 2019 as well was it was 5v5, right? The roster construction is different. I guess to your point, you could look at it to see who like performed well during that year, and maybe like their stock goes a little bit higher just because like, all right, they played well in that game, it might run the same and things like that. But like I spoke on earlier, I think you still address going into the offseason the same way, just trying to pick up a main AR that you're comfortable with and then an entry sub. But in terms of like the player pool, I don't think it changes much on who you're looking at, and you don't really look too much into that season, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with Dan on that as well. Even if the game does play similar, a 3-year gap is still a lot of time. If you look at any other esport like a League of Legends or CS where they're still playing the same game, a way a player performed 3 years ago can be vastly different to how they perform nowadays.
Well, thanks. Another one for the coaches from Romeo. What is the coach's perception overall impression? Or sorry, let me start over. What is the coach's overall impression on role swapping in contrast to player swaps this season?
Think about that. I assume they're talking about like the Preston swap.
And Dill as well.
You can take that one, Brian, if you have an answer.
Yeah. I think role swapping ends up being very beneficial for a team. It helped us a lot last year because when you swap roles between players, they get a much better grasp on the game because they learn, if it's like an AR or an SMG switching to an AR, they're going to learn how ARs play a lot of positions and learn those power positions the AR players go to. And on the flip side, an AR switching to an SMG, you're going to find out timings to hit and routes SMG players like to hit. So even if you just switch roles for a couple weeks, which is things we did back in the Cold War season as well, I think it gives you a much better knowledge and game sense about how the game's played and just helps you improve as a player overall. So I've always been a fan of role swapping and just trying things out because all these players in the league have a ton of skills, and from game to game, their skill set can just transfer from one role to another.
Yeah, now that you mentioned as well, just to add on, I remember Attach specifically saying that helped his transition a lot because he ran a sub on a lot of the maps. So he was just like, now that I have an AR, I remember what routes I would try to take, or I remember what I was trying to do as an SMG. And now that I have an AR, I would just go lock down that lane or kind of know where to find the subs because he played it for quite a bit, and then just remember where to play as an AR in the power positions and shutting down those lanes. So sometimes it just helps players because they're more aware of what the opponent's SMGs are trying to do and doing a good job of shutting that down.
Thanks, Dan. This will be our last question. This is from Echo. How will Minnesota Rokkr provide updates on roster changes moving forward? For instance, once free agency starts, if someone doesn't want to resign, will that be public knowledge? Will Rokkr be sharing that information with fans?
I mean, I can take first crack at that. I think as everybody hopefully has seen from us over the past 3 years, we want to be as transparent as possible, share as much information as possible with fans. But at the same time, we can't put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to free agency and players we're pursuing and that sort of thing. So, I think you can probably expect from us what you saw the first 2 free agencies. Obviously, we weren't active last year, but we want to share as much as we can, and we'll share what we can when we can. And as decisions are made, those are things that we'll talk about, and those updates will, usually come from the coaches or Jake. But at the same time, like you got to keep some cards close to the vest. So for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. We had actually a journalist join late. I'm going to give Kevin an opportunity to ask a question if he's got them. If not, that's totally fine. You can come off mute if you have questions, Kevin. Okay.
While we're, one thing I want to say, I want to touch on the question about Minnesota. One of the things I want to give a shout out to, several people at our organization that were a part of this. Heading into this season, there was a lot of effort, whether it was time, energy, budget, resources put into making sure we had the best possible competitive environment for the players here, upgrading the internet, making sure that we did the technical studies that were necessary to ensure that the players had what they need to be at their best. And that's super important to us for in any of the titles that we're in, and all the ones we're in have online qualifiers in some form. So this isn't specific to COD. It's really important to create the best possible competitive environment for our players, whether they're playing for Minnesota or anywhere else. But one thing I do want to say before we wrap, really want to thank the fans again. Like, the passion that we continually see from Rokkr fans is really, it's amazing, and it inspires everybody that's associated with this organization every day. And to the fans that get frustrated when the team doesn't do well, and we're looking at the chat here. Like, I know there's some frustration out there, and you know what? There should be frustration. Like we said at the top, the team did not meet expectations, and as frustrated as the fans feel, that frustration is shared by everybody in the organization when the teams don't do well. So, whether you agree with the decisions that are made on a case by case basis or not, I don't want any fans to have any doubt that the passion and desire to win and the desire to put a championship team together is as important to this organization as anything else that we do. So honestly, I would be worried if fans weren't frustrated when the team doesn't do well. Like, if you reach that point as a team in any competitive environment, if the fans stop caring, you're in big trouble. So, we appreciate the passion, and we appreciate it when the passion is positive, and we still appreciate it when it's not as positive, and we understand it.
All right. Going once, going twice. Yeah, there he is. Hey, Kevin.
Hi, my apologies, everyone. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out. It's so refreshing and nice to see organizations actually come to discuss esports in a way that's informative, and with the understanding, obviously, there are some questions you cannot answer, and we totally understand that. My apologies again for missing the first half, but I do have just a question or two. How bullish are we still on the Activision Blizzard side of the esports ecosystem as an organization?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that earlier, and
okay.
There'll be some redundancy to this answer, but the basic premise that we had when we started this organization and got involved in Call of Duty and CDL 3 years ago is still very strong. We've seen the passion at the local level, the energy, and we just talked a lot about it, but that passion and that energy that our fans showed at Major 2 was like really surpassed, I think, all of our expectations. And we see it time and again at watch parties in our, I saw someone in the YouTube chat shouted out the Discord watch parties, which I left out before. So definitely shout out to our Discord community. At the risk, to avoid being redundant, I talked earlier, and obviously the VOD will be available, but, some of the things that we see, some of the positives around the structure of the season and how that paid off with the competitiveness of the final major and going into champs. Those are things that are really positive. There are things that, that structurally can improve, and that I know that there's a lot of people thinking about what that looks like. We don't know much more than what's out there publicly about the Microsoft acquisition, but we've spoken publicly before about the positives associated with that. So overall, and I said this when it came up earlier, we're one of the more vocal teams behind the scenes with Activision Blizzard. And when I say we, it's a collective we, right? We spend a lot of time talking with our coaches, and, you know, by extension, them getting feedback from the players on league issues. And we're never shy about voicing those things behind the scenes. We like to, you know, we're not necessarily vocal in a public facing way, because we do want to respect sort of internal processes within the league. But, you know, there's a lot of momentum across the Call of Duty community heading into Modern Warfare 2, and we're excited for it.
Awesome. And lastly, for me, do you think companies going public, such as FaZe and perhaps others, bodes well for the esports ecosystem? And do you think it's more likely to sort of force esports organizations to behave going forward?
You know, I think generally speaking, it's a positive, and this isn't specific to FaZe or any other organization, but generally speaking, it was interesting. Yesterday I was at, I'll try not to get into boring level of detail, but yes, I was at some meetings in Chicago yesterday with some of their like tourism and some folks from their mayor's office. They're looking to do more around esports, and it was really interesting talking to some people. There was somebody there that had never heard of FaZe Clan before. And that was sort of a reminder to me that, like, even though I'm, you know, relatively new in the esports world compared to these guys and compared to others, like, as big as FaZe Clan is, as big as some of the other big brands are, there's still a lot of people out there that have a lot to learn about the esports system. So I think in terms of like putting, you know, the long-term benefits with more media coverage, more potential sponsor and brand awareness, more awareness just broadly speaking in the public consciousness, organizations going public just generates more of that attention. Like, that's not our end goal. Our structure and model is very different. So it's not something that we, you know, think about much from a true business standpoint internally, but obviously we're watching those stories unfold, and it's pretty interesng.
I appreciate all your time. Thank you, guys.
Jake, if you want to add to that, I mean, Jake has a finance background and follows all those stories pretty closely.
Yeah, no, nothing too much to add. Like Brett said, I mean, when you're publicly traded, right, obviously, Kevin, to your point, there's a lot more public scrutiny, a lot more financial regulation. You're obligated to be much more buttoned up to actually go through the IPO process, right? And to Brett's point, you know, more eyeballs are good. It's good for the scene. It's good for the players. It's good for the orgs. It's good for non-endemic partners who may have a hard time understanding why competitive video games are a thing and how they're so big. I think nothing negative will come from, or at least, you know, in my opinion, I don't see very many negatives in them being listed.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for the time today. Thank you to our fans for joining us online. Make sure you like and subscribe, and stay tuned as we'll have more news heading into Rokkr off season. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.